Hey guys, how you doing? I had this post in my mind for a while and I finally decided to go along with it. And basically what I wanted to do is describe do you go about running an internal pen test from start to finish. I'm gonna use a small environment I have here composed by a Windows server and a Kali Linux attacking machine to simulate some of the techniques for all I can that I'm going to talk about. So basically, the first thing you want to do when you start an Active Directory engagement is to find the domain name and the IP address of the domain controller. The domain name can be the same as the external client's website, but it may also be different. For example, instead of being company.com, it can be company internal or company local or something completely different than that. So one way we can make sure how to find this information is to run a specific map script. This script is part of a map and it's a very important script that I use all the time. The output here is very interesting and basically uses the DHCP protocol to find the domain name and the DC IP address. Now, in this output here, this is our internal IP for our machine that's connected to the domain. Let's imagine we're directly connected to the domain in an assumed bridge scenario. This here is the IP address of the main controller. Under domain name server, you have the same domain controller. Sometimes you may have additional domain controllers or DNS servers. And an important information is the name of the AD domain. In this case, local domain. So this is all the information we need to get started. Now, basically, in my company, we run two types of internal pen tests: comprehensive and targeted. The comprehensive pen test runs practically the same stages that you would do for a perimeter pen test, but from a different perspective. So we start from discovery scans to identify which hosts are live. Then we try to identify running services and their versions. Then we run vulnerability scans, mostly through Nessus, but also we run manual vulnerability scans and manual enumeration with several techniques and multiple tools. some tools I like for that are NXE or NetExec. Okay. So once we identify vulnerabilities, we try to identify an attack scenario that we can launch and that hopefully will get us to compromise the domain. The difference with the targeted engagements is that with targeted engagements, oftentimes we may have or not a defined scope. Sometimes the client doesn't even provide us with a defined scope, and we can target pretty much all we can find in the network environment. Additionally, we don't run automated vulnerability scans in this case, and we don't report all the vulnerabilities we find, any one of them, because we want to focus on the highest risk vulnerabilities we can find that can grant us access to the Active Directory environment and potentially that can give us domain administrator level access. I ran both types of Pentest for a while, and additionally I happen to also run both the perimeter and the internal Pentest for the same client sometimes. And over time, my preference definitely moves to the targeted environment Pentest, because targeted environments resemble more closely what a real adversary would do. They're much more challenging, but much more satisfying under a certain point of view. We optimize our testing time because most of our testing time with targeted engagements is dedicated to finding a vulnerability and to move laterally. We don't deal with false positives from vulnerability scanners output. That's pretty much a waste of time if you think about it. Alright, so once we do that, we want to start enumerating valid usernames to try to find a foothold in Active Directory. And I normally use two tools combined together. One is called LDAP-NumNum that enumerates the user, and one is called statistically likely usernames that provides a series of word lists, basically, of potential usernames that you can use to enumerate valid accounts. That's pretty much what I do with every engagement, the same type of command. So we feed a word list from statistically likely username to this program. We define an output file. We provide the DNS domain, say domain.local, for example. We pretty much define how fast our enumeration might be, and we provide the IP address of the domain controller that we found previously. This is referred to another machine, an empty machine from Hack the Box that I was trying to hack some time ago. So basically, statistically likely usernames contains a series of word lists pretty much including different naming scheme, kind of like first initial, last name, first name dot last name, and so on and so forth. You can see that in this case I enumerated 5 valid users using the specific word list. Now I wanted to give you an idea of what this list of files looks like. There you go. So basically what I do when I enumerate usernames is I try each and every one of these word lists one by one, and I store the results in a text file. So at the end of the day I find myself with a large text file containing valid usernames. So now we have enumerated a certain number of usernames. What we can do with this? Not a lot, sadly. Most attacks and any privilege escalation path you pretty much may think about requires a valid set of credentials, so a valid username and password. However, there are some attacks we can conduct in order to find a password that don't require to have a password to be executed. The first one is the so-called srep roast. That practically is a vulnerability occurring when an Active Directory account is configured without requiring Kerberos pre-authentication. So pretty much I'll show you with Windows what this means. So if we go to my domain controller here and we check Active Directory users and computers, and of course now it decided to force me to log in. No surprise, I hate Windows. Gonna have to check the password, I don't remember it, but I wrote it down in the description of the virtual machine, so give me a sec. Sorry, I had to change the password because of course it was expired. Always at the right time. Now, if we're able finally go to Active Directory users and computers, I have here a user I configured in order to make it vulnerable to this attack. I used the script to create a bunch of users, but it's more of a fake thing. Anyway, if we go to properties, there you go. This is the problem here that allows this type of attack. Do not require Kerberos pre-authentication. Basically, this allows for an attack where a malicious attacker can request a ticket granting ticket pretending to be somebody else, and in this case the DC won't check the identity of who requests the ticket and will pretty much attach the password hash of the user that requested it to the ticket, and so we can gain a password hash that we can hopefully crack offline, mostly with Hashcat. This can be an easy win or not, depending on how strong the password policy for the client is. I normally see something like 8 or 12 characters at the most, but I also had the chance to testimony. Password policy is much stronger than that, like 15 or 24 characters. When this is the case, you can pretty much forget about crack any hash because you're totally wasting your time. So okay. If you want to see how it works, you can watch the video associated with my previous episode. If this attack succeeds, we're gonna find ourselves with an NTM. If this attack succeeds, we're gonna find ourselves with an NTML2 hash that we can once again try to crack offline. Now, for some reason, responder poisons the traffic from my router, but not the traffic from my internal domain, probably because there's no active traffic right now. But anyway, the concept is just the same. I'm going to show you what responder looks like when it captures a hash. Another way to find the foothold in Active Directory is password spraying. In this case, we use Kerberoot to try a series of common passwords one at a time against our list of usernames. In this case, the attack was successful, but oftentimes this is not the case. Anyway, this tool can cause massive account lockouts, so I recommend to use certain switches, especially the safe switch that blocks the spray as soon as an account comes back as locked. And I also recommend to reduce the number of threads and enable verbose output. Also, it's probably prudent to spray only a few users at a time and not all of them in one time. If nothing worked to gain a foothold in Active Directory, the last thing you can do is ask the client to provision you with an account. It's not something I normally like because, in my opinion, demonstrating how a vulnerability allows an unauthenticated user to obtain valid credentials is much more valuable to the client. But nonetheless, you don't want to stop the test without going further and attempt all you can attempt. As a lot of attack vectors and privilege escalation will be excluded as we don't have a valid password. So now that you have a foothold, you want to run additional enumeration and you want to see what you can access with those credentials. So enumerate SMB shares again. See if you can access FTP or if those credentials are valid elsewhere, for example a VPN or Outlook web access, you name it. I mean, there are too many cases to list them all here, so I'll leave that to your imagination. As for privilege escalation vectors, there can be a whole lot of them. The first case that's very common is with remote code execution vulnerabilities often originated by missing patches like Eternal Blue. Now, I don't normally attempt exploitation because oftentimes they affect non-domain joined computers. And even when the hosts are domain joined, the risks outweigh the benefits because these exploits are often susceptible to cause crashes. So you don't want to attempt exploitation without advising the customer. A common attack vector for privilege escalation is anti-directory certificate services. There are multiple misconfigurations allowing any domain computer or any domain user, depending on the specific case, to request a certificate on behalf of any other user or computer. And this is an easy way to achieve a privilege escalation, normally with the help of the Certify tool. Anyway, now we're at the end of our journey, but I want to point out that getting the A is not the ultimate goal of an internal pentest, unlike what you might have heard so far. Normally, this type of pentests are done to access confidential and sensitive information, and that's the purpose of the engagement as stated in the SAO. So the fact you gain domain level access, DA access, along the way is a plus, but not necessarily a goal per se. For example, some time ago I had a chance to read a report that was related to a previous cycle of a project I was working on, where the tester basically had run a responder and grabbed an NTLM hash for an administrator account, and he was lucky enough to crack the password offline because he was weak. At that point, he concluded the attack scenario without showing any impact, and I thought it was probably the worst report I've ever read. Because even having domain administrator doesn't mean anything to the client unless you can show them what kind of damages an attacker getting to that level might do. I don't normally dump the NTDIS file because that's too disruptive and it's against our rules. But there are ways to show impact, for example, displaying confidential document retrieved in clear text somewhere. I had cases where I found ransomware notes in a network share and also was able to access Teams as the user was logged on because there was a misconfiguration allowing any domain users to RDP to 3 non-domain controller servers. So that was very juicy. Okay, I wanted to write this post for a while, so guys, I hope you enjoyed it. And feel free to leave any comments and observations you like. Thank you. Bye bye.